So no, we posted a revised agenda that had an additional item, the discussion of adherence to federal guidelines, which is something Patrick wanted to talk about. So that was posted. If it's, do you want to take some stuff out of order while we wait for Patrick, or you?
Well, I think we can do, is there any communication, we can go through and I think we'll stop at number 9.
Sure. So under communications, Patrick wants to talk to you about his experience giving some remarks at the opening of school last Monday with teachers and staff and how important that is. So I'll reserve that for him when he gets here. I also wanted to just remind you guys that I happened to watch the last meeting back because I think I wanted to make sure that I was hearing everything clearly. And I just want to remind people with their cell phones. So I was definitely in the meeting texting on my cell phone because I wasn't sure who was picking my child up. But please keep in mind that if you use your cell phone during the meeting, people could ask for that. So just putting that out there. You want to protect yourself and not be on your cell phone during the meeting. So anybody that wants my text messages with my husband, I apologize. I say unkind things to him, but he deserves them. So.
Okay. The warrants are being...
Yep, they have not gone out yet because Jerry was out today, but they'll go through tomorrow for circulation.
Okay. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes, draft minutes from our last meeting?
Yes.
Anybody have any changes or edits or anything?
No.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from August 20th, 2024?
Second?
No,
Oh.
Make the motion first.
Oh, motion?
So
What do I
moved.
say? So moved.
Now you can
Okay,
second.
words.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. We want, I think if do we need to wait for Patrick for the number 11? What do we?
Yeah, so let me give you the fall sports update. Right, that's a fun one.
Yep.
So in your packet, you have our fall sports numbers. I think during Mark's opening remarks last week, he talked a little bit about the number of student athletes there were, and there was a question, is that the same percentage? And he didn't have all that information. So what you have in front of you is our most up-to-date fall sports numbers. I will just make a caveat that occasionally we do pick up a couple more students in cross-country as we get into the first week or two of school. But these are the numbers as they stand. We are obviously in a great place with our participation for our student athletes. 40% of our high school students are participating in one of our fall sports. Our 42%.
It's a great number.
There's many more columns that are not on this printout, but you know, obviously we are looking. We have a new coach in place with football, with girls soccer. So you know, excited for good things to come with those groups. Golf has a new coach this year as well. We had a tremendous turnout for volleyball, which seems to be the very popular sport over the past few years. So I think volleyball is the only place where we did have to make some cuts.
Do we have 2 levels of volleyball?
We have 3. So we have freshman, JV, and varsity volleyball.
And that's the same for football?
Football is freshman football, and then JV and varsity morph a little bit.
Okay.
Kids that are on the JV team more often than not dress for the varsity games as well.
Yeah, no, the numbers look good. Does anybody have any questions?
No. What was the second? You said there was a new golf coach, and then what was the second one?
So we have a brand new football coach to Pembroke, a brand new girls soccer coach to Pembroke, and our golf coach is
Okay.
a returning coach that took a few years off. Now
Okay.
that Brandon Hall has moved on, he was our golf coach.
Okay.
Is the volleyball, isn't there a new returning volleyball coach? No?
So the head coach of it is still John. I'm only talking about the head coaching
Oh,
positions,
okay,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, the sub-varsity positions move around a little bit over the course
Yeah,
of
okay,
year
got
to
it.
year.
Got it, all right.
I was just giving the fall sports update. Everything's great. So we'll continue to give you guys updates as we go through the fall. By the next meeting or so, we'll probably start talking about any needed waivers for winter sports. We generally take a look at girls ice hockey. We've looked at girls basketball in the past. So those will be coming in the next meeting or two.
Thank you. So now Patrick's here, we're going to get back to
So thank you, by the way, for opening it up. My apologies for being delayed. There was a truck fire on 128, so an hour and 50 minutes to go. 32 miles is basically what happened. And again, my apologies. Just to confirm,
I told them you wanted to tell them how much fun you had last Monday addressing the staff.
I did actually. So yeah, under communications, last Monday when the staff kind of came to school for the first time, I've done this for multiple years as chairman of the school committee, and I would strongly encourage in future years you guys to do this, right? It's a great time for us as a committee to say thank you to teachers and to the staff for everything they do. It's a great way to kick off the year, show a partnership, a level of gratitude, and a level of thanks on behalf of the committee. Again, I actually think the teachers and the staff really appreciate it. I loved it. There's a lot of energy. Some people that I haven't seen in a while kind of coming up that day, but just feeling the energy in the room, feeling people kind of ready to go, kind of get everybody started off on the right foot was just super positive. So I really would encourage you all to kind of just make a note of that, and whoever the chair is next year, the following year, that type of thing, to please do that.
Sounds like a great.
Yeah, it was awesome. The other thing too, just a reminder, we are voting today in Massachusetts, so we have until 8 o'clock. Hoping that we can get out. So if before 8 o'clock, if any of you haven't voted, please vote. If anyone out there hasn't voted, please vote. So where are you?
Yep, so the next item is the discussion of adherence to federal guidelines that we added on the revised agenda.
Okay,
That's
so
not for you.
it's okay. So there's a couple of things that we're going to talk a little bit more about the handbooks tonight. And I guess, it's kind of part of what I feel as though is my role, having been sort of around this table for a really long time. And I think it's important for folks watching. I think it's important for folks that care enough to come to these meetings on a regular basis to understand we don't have a lot of choice when it comes to federal regulation and state law and or federal law, right? We have to follow the regulation and the laws that are imposed upon us by government up the food chain, so to speak, right? Supremacy clause of the Constitution requires that we do that. Figured you like that one, just throw it in a little bit, right? So we don't have to like the regulation and we don't have to like the law, but we have to follow it. We do, however, have some rights as a governing body in this district. We have rights around communication. We have rights around how that law is executed. We have rights around how we adjudicate sometimes, not all the time. But, I personally have significant issues around some of the things that we've been talking about around this table, and we'll talk about again tonight. It is unfortunate that regulatory bodies continuously impose upon the lowest level of government arduous steps to ultimately take. It usually costs us money, it costs us time, it costs us energy, and it candidly diverts our attention at times when our attention needs to be focused in other places. But we do have to follow the regulation, and we do have to follow the law, and we will do that. How we ultimately set forth to communicate or adjudicate or what have you is a bit up to us, even in this circumstance. I know it's very prescriptive. I thought you did a really good job on the Title IX thing, just to explain what has to be done, but there is discretion there, right? And I think we as a district have been very good in the past when we have discretion to use a little logic, right? And to look out for the children and to make sure that kind of kids come first when we're figuring out sort of the steps to take. So as we get into this discussion, I think that's something that's really important for all of us to think about and consider. The other thing is, it's okay if we don't all agree, right? We usually get to a better place when that happens because we're throwing things out there. We're forcing each other to think. It is exactly what should happen around this table, right? A respectful, healthy debate is a very good thing. it's okay for us not to agree. But, we will ultimately follow the law and the regulation. It could change. It could change in very short order. Right now, I'm giving a bit of an opinion for a second. It is unfortunate that Massachusetts did not sign on with 26 other states to challenge the existing Title IX regulation. But because they didn't, it did go into effect in Massachusetts on August 1st, right? And we sort of have to figure out how to deal with that. It's further unfortunate that, in my view, it was pushed through in a very quick way, didn't give us a lot of time to really dive in and move forward, but it is where it is, right? So just please keep that in mind as we kind of get into some of these discussions. Do you want to say anything else?
No.
Any
I think
questions?
We've talked a lot about just the funding piece and the mechanism. We did have that one-off conversation at a meeting about a GoFundMe page. What if we choose not to?
Yeah, it's, okay, so I need to, so no, I'm actually glad you raised that, right? So if we didn't take federal dollars, we wouldn't have a school district, right? If we don't take Chapter 70 funding from the Commonwealth, we are not going to have a school district. It is, all the GoFundMes on the planet are not going to raise enough money to create $15 to $17 million of sustainable revenue that could be brought in to the school district on an annual basis. So, look, I think it's great that folks have sort of that level of passion. The reality is federal funding and state funding is given to school districts in local communities to make you dependent sort of on those fundings. I mean, it is the way our government funds public education in this country today, right? And so not taking those funds is not optional. It's not optional, candidly, for any of the districts within the Commonwealth, or I would argue any public district across the country. So yeah, that's just, it's never going to be able to happen. Any other questions or thoughts, at least just on sort of that piece? Okay.
Next, we're going to talk about your goals. So in your packets, I gave you kind of where the last version of the goals landed in September of 2023, and then Allison had shared kind of a template for how it could look moving forward. I think this is Chelmsford Public Schools that we gave you. So I do think, Sue, I think you brought it up the last time, and we've talked about it a little bit at previous meetings. There's some significant work that needs to happen on your goals, but only you guys can do that work. So I think, and when I looked back for the minutes for the past few years, we started like full force in September, and then it kind of just dies off because other interests come up and, focus shifts a little bit. So what you have are where we were in September of 2023, our goal areas being communication, achievement, social emotional wellness, and technology in no particular order. Obviously, achievement is the number one thing we do. But I think it might make sense for you all to take a look at these from last year. Maybe take a look at some other school districts that are out there like Chelmsford and see if there's some suggestions you'd like to make moving forward. I wouldn't necessarily suggest changing your buckets. I think those are the right 4 categories, and that's kind of how we build administrator goals and teacher goals. But if there's some gaping hole in the areas that we're addressing, obviously we're interested to hear what you're thinking about that as well. But this takes work, and I just want to say again, it's only the 5 of you that can do the work. So Natalie can coordinate the colored edits and circulate the documents, but you all have to take the time to go in and put your thoughts, or else the document kind of dies come mid-October and it doesn't really get anywhere, right? It's not a living, breathing document, so.
So I just, one thing about what I had shared, this wasn't to take necessarily what the written part, but the other part of this is on their website. Not only do they list the goals, but they use a similar template to follow up with
Right.
how they do. So it's more to see that too, like a link of seeing. If you go to their website, you can see, and I feel like they do a really good job of grading themselves basically from like how they're doing, which I think is one thing for us to work on publishing goals, but even better would be to follow up on that.
Right, Right, I would envision when you guys are in the place where we have some pretty standard goals, that we would have a scorecard like we have for the tech scorecard. So quarterly, it comes back and we can kind of weigh in on, what progress has been made. Maybe timelines need to be shifted a little bit, but bringing it back every couple of months so that you guys can kind of check in.
I know from going and attending select board meetings, they do, they call them working groups, where they're not a public meeting to do some work similar to this. Is that something we're able to do, or do we need to have them be, like, could we assign this to like one of the education subcommittee or something to look at, or how would you imagine, like, how can we make this happen?
So I think that all 5 of you should be doing the work. I don't think it's subcommittee work. I am not a huge proponent of working groups. I think they're a way around some of the open meeting law pieces, but you all could post a meeting just for goals, right? And we've done this a couple of times before. Depending on kind of where you want to go with it, some of it, you could do it in executive session, depending upon what some of the topics are. I don't anticipate you're going to have a huge goal about collective bargaining, but that is something that could be handled in executive session.
What else? What do you guys think about this? I think everybody really should weigh in on this one and sort of, is it important? Why is it important? What are the objectives of kind of going down this path? I mean, what thoughts, Katrina?
Yeah, I feel like if we schedule a meeting so that way we can get one on the books, whether we do that now, I think might make sense, and then leave enough room if we need a second meeting, because I imagine it could be done in one meeting if we do some over email, like send everything to Erin.
Yeah, or Natalie.
Or Natalie, yeah. So that way we have some work done in advance and then we meet one time, but with some room if we need to. So
I think
maybe
having a meeting solely dedicated to this
Exactly.
topic is the only way you're going
in
to get
September.
That's part
Yeah.
I agree with that as well. I found in past years, what happens is we all separately send goals to one person because we don't want to break open meeting law.
Right.
And it gets cumbersome. We don't know what the other people are thinking. We don't have like a collective thought on paper. And it comes, that's how we end up with this, and it comes together so jumbled. And I
Yeah.
would love to see it, like, just to be able to have like a discussion, an open discussion, like, what do you think is important? Do we still want, this to be a priority this year or whatever? So I think having just a meeting specific to that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
I wish we could do, I know you're not a fan of it.
Oh yeah,
but
I don't
like,
think this is a working group thing, because I think all 5 of you should do it, but
I
the
agree
concept
with
of
you,
working group, I understand.
but honestly, like, if we had, the alternate to that would be, have it as an agenda item on a regular school committee meeting, maybe the next one, and then we all give our thoughts and then send it to the working group to incorporate those thoughts into a document with Natalie or something. I just kind of feel like, I don't know.
That is somewhat in our purview, right? So
Yeah.
we could do that, right, Sue? I mean, as you kind of, it's almost like a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, a
I mean,
hybrid, right.
at the end of the day, right? So we absolutely, we could do that. We even have a formal subcommittee, right? But I do think, the one thing I do think is getting the input of all 5 first is no matter what we do.
Right.
Yeah.
is
And the
critically
next meeting
important.
is only like 2 weeks away, so we
Yeah.
could potentially just all come up with some goals that we think are important, mention them in the next meeting, and then send off like 2 people to be the working group. I don't necessarily think we need a subcommittee, because it's like,
I think it's, yeah.
but,
David?
I look at some of these things, and I say this respectfully, it's a lot of wording. And to me, like,
Yeah.
when I say to somebody, I think of achievement, I want to see better scores and better grades. I see, a series of nicely worded,
David, I feel like you've been at this table long enough to know what a SMART goal is.
Yeah.
Measurable,
No,
achievable, there has to be certain
they have to be,
components of
they
the
have to be
words.
attainable and all that.
Yes.
Trust me, between SMART goals, Sierras, and all, I've had enough of that to last me a lifetime.
I'm going to swat your SMART goal.
But I just really would like to come up with some, almost like a hard number type of thing. It would say, can we raise the scores 1%, 2%? Can we raise, that to me is functional numbers that people can deal with. When you say to somebody, hey, our scores across the board are 750.
Right.
Compared to what?
What is
You know,
that?
like, what is 750? Well, if we were at 350 and now we're at 750, that's amazing. If
Yeah.
we were at 765 and we're at 750, to
That's
me,
fine.
information is relative. And for people sitting out in the audience that don't know what we do, as I said,
Yeah.
Erin, very good point. I've been dealing with SMART goals and all these things for years.
Yeah.
But a lot of people hear numbers and expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times you have to say to somebody, we went from 5% to 8% or 8% to 12%. That's hard numbers. So I guess that's kind of my point. I'm more of a hard number person.
I would
So-
agree with David. I think having some more measurable pieces in there would be helpful. And even if we need to do like a high and a low range, right? Like here's what we hope to do and here's our stretch goal, right? But also I think what I heard you say is having it written more in plain language, so language that's good for parents and families. And I think that's also part of the new IEP process that's happening this year anyways. So it makes sense to have it written that way.
I guess a lot of times when I talk to parents, like if you take like the fall sport numbers, if you say, someone says, well, I don't know if our football program is doing good. Well, we have 64 kids out of this number. People go, oh, well, that's better than I thought. Or, hey, we have 20 kids on the golf team. People say, well, how many people play golf at once?
Right.
But people then understand kind of the budgetary side of it, and they understand why we spend X amount on, hockey ice time, for
Yeah.
example. How many kids play hockey in the school? If you get 8 kids playing hockey and we're spending $1 million on ice time, you got to kind of question your investment. I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent, but again,
We're
I
gonna
guess.
get some hockey hate mail.
I don't know what you're thinking about there, kid.
Never
No,
touch that
no.
one.
No, I'm a big fan of hockey, trust me. That, my niece actually played professional women's hockey. But it's just stuff like I just find people like concrete numbers and stuff they can relate to.
Right.
You know
I
what I
love that.
mean? It's less,
Smart.
I hate to use the term clutter, so
I'd be
simplifying.
happy to, once, we all kind of have our ideas presented, to run with it from there. I'm happy to
Okay.
go on.
So I guess that's a question. Who here would like to be part of the working group if we choose to do that? Who would volunteer to do that?
I definitely do it.
Yeah, I would too. But I feel like it might make sense just for us all to do it for the goals. But that's just me.
You're on the side of having all 5 of us meet?
Yeah.
For just a
Well, no, I think we
specific,
should definitely do that. I think we should all come up with, if we have the same 4, as our 4 main, so we have communication, achievement,
right.
health, wellness, and technology, and then within those have, because I think if we don't have goals as a committee, then, we have to be one unit moving forward into the budgets, into
Yeah.
negotiations, into just all of it. So by having, I think on paper, it also keeps us accountable to what is
Yeah.
happening as well.
The one thing I'm going to throw out, I think I've been through 147 different iterations of school committee goals over the past couple decades, but goals are only as good as what we do with them, right? So at the end of the day, one of the things that I would ask you all to really think about is, why are we going about doing this? Why are we doing it? Why are we putting these down on paper? What is the purpose for this? And forget the acronyms, the SMART and everything else. They should be actionable. It should be doing something. There should be a deliverable behind whatever these things are.
I would add one more, they should be achievable.
100% should be
You know what I'm saying?
achievable.
We can't, like, say we're gonna have
Yeah.
100% attendance. It's impossible.
I-
You know what I mean?
of course,
So-
no, it's
But again,
100%
it's, to
right,
me, a lot
right.
of people since they, again, what does that number mean? And I guess I'm probably stuck on numbers and I apologize.
No, but I also think that we can come up with all the great goals in the world, but if you don't templatize this a little bit, right? I mean, I will say, the one thing that I do like about what you sent around is it's very succinct, it's reasonably plain English, and there's action steps. What are we going to do? Now, here's the other thing to remember. Coming up with a plan is easy. Executing the plan is the really hard work. And you have to remember everything that we're going to do this year. Because a lot of times you get to these goals and all of a sudden, we're going to do 6 years worth of work in the next 6 months because we're super excited. And to your point, it's not achievable, right?
Right.
So I think those are just, things to think about. Whether it's this that you gave us, Allison, that Chelmsford does, or something similar, I think understanding, and it's like 3 or 4 very succinct things with very clear action steps. So why don't we do this? Because what I'm hearing is consensus about let's get the 5 of us together in one of our next 2 meetings or so, time box it, right, which I think is important too. Maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes, whatever the number is, I'll give it some thought. And then coming out of that, we will ask a couple of people to take everything that we talked about, quick working group, because it's very defined, just this, right? To pull it together and then bring it back to the team of, this is what we heard, right? So can even be a first read, second read, kind of just how we do business. And then we can adopt them and we can publish them, we can put them out on the website, hold ourselves accountable to the public with them. And you know, we can sort of take the process from there.
And one thing I was going to say about the working group piece too, I think that actually would help, because then we could also use that working group to help us with data collection and analysis during the year to make sure that we're on track. Because I think it's so easy to collect data and then do nothing with it. But I think if we could, maybe that working group, we list out actually where the data is coming from, so that when we need to pull it, let's say 3 times this year or 2 times this year, we could start with 2 times, right? Because we don't want to, I think, overburden ourselves. We also want to make sure that we're looking at the data. Would be to pull that and make sure we talk with principals, whether it be through Erin or what have you, to make sure that the data is aligned to what teachers see as the most helpful for achievement. Because I think that's a piece where we could guess at it, but we may or may not pick the right one.
If I may, Petra, I've always used the term buy-in. I mean, we can set amazing goals, whether it's for administration, for teachers, for
Yep.
sports, for whatever. If they're not going to buy into it, you know, if we set something unrealistic, you know, if we get some input where someone
Right.
says, hey, yes, we can take our program from here to here. We can probably
Right.
raise our score from here to here.
Right.
You know, maybe we don't set the goal high enough, maybe we set it too high. You know, but if there's some buy-in, again, whether it's from the administration,
Feedback.
even parents, you know, what I mean,
Right.
when people sit and say, hey,
Great idea.
That
I
you know,
do
always
think,
set
so
them in
so keep
stone
in mind
kind
that
of
the goals start with you guys, right? So
Yeah.
Right.
school committee,
Right.
then that defines my goals,
Yeah.
that defines administrator goals, that defines teacher goals. So
Mm-hmm.
as a school committee, your goal should not necessarily be to increase 4th grade MCAS ELA scores by 3%. That's too small. You have to reach bigger than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a teacher goal, right? That's a
Yeah.
grade level goal. So just keeping that in mind is that, you know, they trickle down. You have goals that become my goals, that become teacher goals, that kind of work their way through.
I actually think it's a little more than that, though. And it is absolutely right. If we were good at this, right, thinking about sort of how organizations run, our goals would funnel down, and we would go from a 50,000-foot goal to a 5,000-foot goal, and it would, you know, our 50,000 feet goals would funnel down. We've got to be very careful in this process to remember our job and remember what our job is not, right? So I think to your point, our job is not to necessarily raise ELA 4th grade MCAS scores by X number or X percentage. Our goal, however, might be to create an environment through financial
Support through
and
curriculum.
you know, curriculum support that will end with incremental test scores, you know, whatever, right? I mean, there's a way to massage it, but again, and this is where this work gets hard, right? Which is why I actually think a working group is a good idea. But you got to remember, we have a job financially, we have a job with curriculum, and we hire the superintendent and the special ed director and the finance, which we don't have because the superintendent is our finance or business manager. That's our job.
Yeah.
Right,
This
at
isn't
the
to,
end of
yeah,
the
this
day.
definitely is not to micromanage the little things. This is more to give that guidance, that overall, like, message.
100%.
Right,
But
and
it's
what you
easy.
prioritize,
It's
what
when
you
you're
want to
doing your
support.
goals, it's easy to get down the rabbit hole.
Oh,
That-
sure, of course.
That's the only caution that I would throw out. So are you guys okay with that as a plan, right? So
it's great.
one of the next 2 meetings, we'll take, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, we'll have a discussion, kind of get it down, and then we'll charge a working group. I think we do need to time box the working group. as far as, the working group will be active from here to here, and this is the purpose.
Can we as the members bring at the next meeting some of our goals so that we can,
Yes.
not just coming up with them, but actually like if we all come with what we
Yeah.
are
Right.
thinking so that we can attempt to make sure we're in the same alignment
Yeah.
so that we're not just
No, I
doing
think
this
that's
in
important.
January.
Yeah, no, I think that is
Okay.
important,
it.
so.
Okay.
You guys good with that?
Yeah, I like that.
I also found a helpful resource from MASC. It was from a learning lunch about goals, so I'll send that to Erin.
I'll send it out.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Next under my report is just an opening of schools update. Guys, we opened school, it was great. Today's day 3. On the first day, we only left 4 children on the side of the road, which is an excellent year for us. Just a reminder to
Our
families.
goal would be no children on the
Right,
side of the road.
That is measurable, that is attainable.
Measurable 0 and 4, and help you with your work. Students can continue to ride the bus over the course of the first 3 weeks without a bus pass anyways, but if you are intending for your child to take the bus, you do need to go in and register them so that we can map them on the route, and I think that's kind of what happened with those 4. In addition, if you haven't heard, there is some conversation out there about a bus driver strike. So there is some unrest between First Student and the Teamsters union. It isn't necessarily our lot here in Pembroke, but more of a national conversation. Our group is obviously excited to be working in Pembroke and to be transporting our children, but if there was a strike action taken on behalf of all drivers, then our drivers would participate in that as well. My understanding through working with First Student is that they have a 21-day hold on a vote to strike, so if they vote to strike, they have to wait 21 days before they could strike anyways. Obviously, the intent is that they work out their issues in those 21 days. So if new information about that comes available, I will share that with you as
The
it comes up.
Pembroke driver's contract is up?
No, but the Pembroke drivers are part of the Teamsters Union.
Understand.
There's some breakdown of negotiations with the Teamsters Union of First Student in New Hampshire, and so that they would vote in solidarity with their fellow members nationwide.
But be out of contract.
They would, they
Be
have
in
a.
violation of the
They,
contract.
yes,
Okay.
correct.
What is the law in
So mean.
Massachusetts if there's no buses?
We'd have to close school.
We'd have to what?
Close.
Close school.
If there's no buses,
Yeah,
right?
so we're
We have
legally
to
required to transport after 1.1 miles?
2 miles.
or
2
or is it 2?
2 miles in all
Um,
kindergartners.
So,
Oh,
The group from our area is optimistic that things will work out in the timeframe, but just putting it on your radar, because I know that there are a few people talking about it. Somebody asked me about it at Staples last weekend, so.
When is the time frame?
They had a pretty high-stakes meeting last Thursday. No vote was taken, so they could meet to vote anytime, and then they have to give 21-day notice of their intent to strike, so.
Okay, and they haven't given that
No.
yet? Okay.
That would make it interesting.
Yeah.
As you, Patrick, alluded to, today is an election day, and there was no voting in our schools. We did not even have people show up try to vote here. So I had a conversation earlier with some staff, and it seemed like everyone found their way to the community center.
I was
so
this close to going to the middle school this morning, just to be,
Me
I know,
too.
right? I should know.
That was great.
But,
That's about it. Our principals kind of shared foreshadowing what the year would look like. Mary Beth, Jess, and I have had an opportunity to get to all 5 schools. In addition to the floors being shiny, which seems to be the big thing about summer, kids are happy, teachers are happy, and it's a great start.
I think it's the earliest I've seen the school bus come down Four Winds Drive at 8 o'clock in the morning, ever.
That's
It's usually
I
like-
change it so my daughter's on that.
Yeah, it's usually like 8:15 or 8:20 when everything
Well, that's
starts
late.
with, well, it's pictures and, the first couple
Oh,
days.
the first few days it takes a
Yeah,
bit, right? The
takes a
buses are
bit,
late.
right? But no, they've been
And that
right
trickles
there.
through to everything at
Yeah,
North ends up being
yeah.
late. It hasn't been that bad.
That's
so,
great.
That is great. In your packet, it wasn't electronic, but it is a paper copy of just a potential meeting calendar. I started with just the school committee meeting dates and topics. Obviously, you guys meet again on the 17th. What I hear you saying is you want me to add that goal piece on there.
Let's talk through it.
Yeah.
The one thing I would ask you guys to do, right, so first of all, the dates of our meeting all the way through this session are on this sheet, right? To the best of your ability, go put them in your calendar now.
Right, so election day, I
Yeah.
don't think you all are looking to meet that day.
That is
I
correct.
didn't know if you wanted to add a second date in November. November's tough with Veterans Day and then the Thanksgiving
Thanksgiving,
holidays. So the 19th is right in the middle. In December, I went back through the last 5 years, you tend to meet once in December, so I didn't want to necessarily pick the 1st or the 3rd. I wanted you all to weigh in on what that date would be.
I think we should at least do, where we're meeting November 19th, we should do the first Tuesday in December. And then we can make a determination
Which is
if we
December
need to
3rd.
make.
Yeah, there might need to be 3 meetings in November, December kind of thing,
Yeah,
spread
right,
out
right.
somehow.
So we can make a determination from there if there's going to be a second one. But the majority of the dates are on here.
Yep.
So the other thing too is, right, topics. So is chair, right? Technically I set the agenda, but it comes from you, right? So if you guys have topics or specific things that you want to see us raise or kind of discuss or talk about, you can send it to me, you can send it to Aaron. Not a violation of open meeting law. It's an administrative task of putting together the agenda. You can send it to either one of us, and we will do our best. I very rarely tell somebody I'm not putting something on the agenda. So we will do our best to kind of make sure that we fit it in. I will say, and I know that we've got, again, pretty early, fiscal year 26 budget calendar on October 1st. On this, I will be shocked if this is not a very difficult budget year, right? So there's going to be additional meetings around budgets, and there's a couple of other things that could impact that and affect that. So we may have to add a couple of meetings in here, but this gives you guys at least an idea where we're going.
And I just sent it to you electronically so that you'll have it and you can take a look.
Okay. Any questions?
I think, not a question, but just a thought, since this year is the first year for the new IEP, if we want, I don't know if there's an aspect of that we want to hear about, maybe.
Yeah, so Jess would cover that under a student services update on the
Okay.
October 1st date. Can put a-
Cool, sounds good. I know you won't necessarily have like a full report, it will only have been a month, so.
Right, but during her budget presentation, she'll be talking about all of the resources that she
True.
needs in order to. It comes full circle.
And then I'll say we don't have any money. And
Yeah.
then Jess says ignore it. That's
Okay.
basically how that's going to work.
We are also, in case you haven't made your way through all the topics, this is a NEASC visit year for us. Mark did allude to that, so there'll be a meeting where we're talking about the NEASC. They're coming in November, I believe, for their site visit, and then they'll give us some preliminary recommendations, and then they'll issue a final report, so.
And then at some point in the probably late winter, we need your evaluation ultimately on your, yeah, so. Any questions on the schedule? I think this is really good for you guys to have.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think this is fantastic.
This is great, thank you for putting this together.
Yep.
And I'll work through a subcommittee topic calendar and just send it to the 2 members of the subcommittee first, and then bring them all to the next one.
Okay.
And see if the subcommittees are missing anything.
Cool.
If we're going to do a budget calendar, we probably should have budget meet.
Yep. Vocational's meeting soon, long-range planning needs to, that's gonna be so fun.
Can we add somewhere like in here, I don't see it, I'm just scrolling, but the school calendar, like, I kind of like, for, like the year school calendar, like, because I think we didn't approve it this year until like May.
So we generally do it in a first read in April, depending on what the meeting dates are. We only met once in April, so the
Yeah.
second read was in May.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just to
okay.
have that be, so that it
The
can-
calendar.
we know when we can take vacation.
Yep, so the school's gonna go back for teachers the first Monday after
Yeah.
Labor Day, for kids Wednesday, Thursday, and
Yeah.
Friday will be a day off.
Is that new?
It's funny, some people just wanna see it in print.
No,
They
it's-
just,
oh,
they
yeah,
like
no,
need to
it's-
see it, so.
Yes.
But yes, I understand.
I'm one of those.
She sent it to us.
electronically.
I just sent it
Yep.
electronically, yeah, so you don't have to worry about the paper copy. So that is all that is under my report. In your packet, you all have what I believe to be the correct red line versions of the elementary handbook, the middle school handbook, and the high school's handbook. In addition, I also sent you our current policy, GBAA, on sexual harassment that was revised in November of 2022 and reviewed in August of 2023, as well as the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination model sexual harassment policy. I circulated a whole bunch of other resources. I know you all have been.
They're actually helpful. They
You
wrote
all
this
have
one.
been researching all
Very
weekend,
helpful.
and I appreciate it.
So a couple of things, right, before we dive into this, that I do kind of want to reiterate. Erin and Natalie do a lot of work to pull a lot of material together for us well in advance of the meetings. Whether it's the handbook or something else, right? The one thing I will say is, if you see something that's kind of clerical in nature, like, geez, the red line's here, but it wasn't here, or, this punctuation's off, or the font's wrong, or something like that, get all that ahead of time, because that's just ministerial stuff that we can clean up. You don't necessarily need to provide your opinion on something. I would prefer you don't do that. But if there's something that you see that you're unsure of, that you don't understand, I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot.
I'd rather
but-
you ask me ahead of time, and then I'll have the conversation with you, and 99.9% of the time, I say, that's a great question, you should ask it in public, right? So, some of it's easy, just newness or not understanding, but some of it is important for other people to hear too, because a lot of people end up having the same questions that you all have.
And that's part of the reason why I want to go back to getting the paper or the hard copies ahead of time, because I do way better with them on
Right, so
paper.
that's something you all
So,
need to decide as a group. You all, in my 15 years, used to only be paper copy, then it became electronic, then it went back to paper, and now it's some sort of hybrid, as I send it electronic, we supply you with paper. If you'd like paper copies, we can have them available for you the Friday that I send the packet out.
Yeah.
But
would
I'm
be-
not driving around and dropping
No,
them
no,
off.
I don't, I'll pick them up, but then.
Me too.
Then I wouldn't need a copy on the meeting. I'd bring my copy with me.
Until the day you forget.
It's not happened.
Never
So that's
forget.
okay. Let's make this super easy. Please continue sending it electronically. I do think some folks around the table, that is easier for them. I would have 2 or 3 copies available
Okay.
on that Friday
Friday.
before, and if you guys want it, it is entirely up to you to drop by
Yeah.
and pick it up here. I do think, out of an abundance of caution, that we should have a paper copy here for us when we come. That we know everybody has the material, everybody can refer to the material, and kind of go from there. So,
But keep in mind, when you receive the documents, whether it's electronic or in paper format ahead of the meeting, they are not public documents until they have been discussed in the meeting. So,
100% right. That
just
is
a point of
absolutely correct.
clarification.
So let's kind of hop in, okay? So we were discussing at the last meeting the policy, the student handbooks. And there's a lot of discussion. Jess did a very good job at kind of going through Title IX and the changes to Title IX. And there is some extensive language that was being put into the handbook around what Title IX was and what it said. And there's, rightfully so, I think, a lot of discussion and question about what's needed, what's necessary, what's not. We agreed to defer that so that we all had time to kind of do our research and dive in and dig in to this meeting to have the discussion. So I just want to open kind of the discussion and the debate about the handbooks. I think some of this cascades through all of them, so I don't think we have to take elementary and then have the same discussion. So if there's something specific about elementary or middle school or high school, we can talk about that after, but I'd at least, let's just get into the majority of what I think we want to talk about, the cascades through all of them on some of the language, if you're all okay with that.
Sure, and I think it would be helpful if we started with just a mutual understanding of what the purpose of a handbook is. And so the purpose of a handbook is a reference document for students and families, written expectations, right? We want it to be a resource. So I can find something in the handbook, I can refer back to the handbook. We don't necessarily go into the detail of restating every Mass General law or federal law that we're held to, but more of a resource. And, if the hope is that we continue to use them as a resource.
Yep. I think that's fine.
But if something is in one of our policies and not in our handbook, that doesn't matter. You're still held to the policy, right? So if we don't reference every policy in our student handbook, you're still held to the
Correct.
school committee policies.
Who would like to start?
Do you want me to start?
Oh, sure, you can start.
So, and just forgive me, because I put notes on I didn't have time to print it out, my notes, so I brought my computer. 'cause I was-
Starting next Friday, you can pick up a paper copy.
These are just my notes. But, so I've taken this whole past week and spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to understand the nuances of the new regulations that came through the Department of Education. And for those at home that weren't paying attention last week and didn't have time to listen to Jess's wonderful presentation. So basically, Title IX is, the landmark civil rights case of 1972, where they determined what sex discrimination in education was, and it was protections for women in education. And so what happened recently was the Biden administration came up with something called the final rule, which also includes gender identity, sex characteristics, sex stereotypes, and one more thing, I can't remember which. But so adding additional language to the Title IX regulations, which is not a law, by the way, it's a regulation through the Department of Education.
Right, but Mass General Law 76, Chapter 5 does talk about sex discrimination and gender identification, and that is a law in Massachusetts.
Yes, so the
there's, I
difference.
think there's some confusion between what's happening federally
Absolutely.
and what already happened in Massachusetts.
Yes, and that's a really important piece, because Massachusetts identified gender identity as a protected class already. And so not every state in the union has done that, but Massachusetts is one of the states that has, one of the first states really, to make that a priority. And so, as many of you know, like, this has been, a thing in Massachusetts. We've had, lots of issues with biological males, for example, who identify as female, participating in sports with their biological females. There was a big one on the news. Dighton, Rehoboth had something on the news where some girl got really hurt. And so forth. So there's sort of been a debate around the whole issue. But so anyways, I dove into it, and I literally looked up the decision by the Supreme Court just so I could understand what it was. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand it is there are 26 states, as well as Moms for Liberty, Alliance for Freedom, Female Athletes
United. Yep.
Yeah,
Female Athletes
Female- yeah,
United and Young American.
And Young America, yeah, so all of them are exempt from the Title IX requirements. And so what that means is that, if any child of a member of Moms for Liberty was in our school district, what that means is that our entire district would be exempt from the Title IX, according to Joe Emerson.
It's school specific, right? So it's
Well,
not your whole district, it's school specific.
According to Joe, he actually emailed us late this afternoon and
I
said,
think he emailed just you and Patrick, but
Yeah.
it's school specific. I have.
well, it may, either way.
Right.
So like, it could be like, if you have a child in Pembroke High School and there was a Moms for Liberty member who signed up to be a member and has signed up to have their child exempt, the whole school is exempt. Because I think there's no way to, I don't know what the reasoning was, but the judge actually said
Want to
that.
understand, I want to
One
front load and
second.
say,
I'll let you
like,
jump in. Hold on.
just want to ask questions, right? Like, I think when you brought up the Month for Liberty thing in our communication last week, it was the first time Joe had heard of it, it was the first
Yeah.
time I had heard of it, so we're all just learning.
Right, of course.
My understanding is that it's not necessarily an exemption, but they're not held to the Title IX federal guidelines. The school does not have to enforce them. But if the school chooses not to enforce something that is a Massachusetts general law, that's not okay.
Of
Like,
course.
That's my understanding of.
But at
the
the same
injunction.
time, the Title IX, the new language that we're putting in the handbook
But that's not,
for
that's in,
Title IX,
but that's in Massachusetts general law, right? So gender identification is part of the law here. So
So-
if there was a Title IX investigation involving a child of a Moms for Liberty member, we're still held to Massachusetts general law, right? So you don't have to,
I'm not 100% on that, and I'm still researching
Okay.
it. So like, that you could be right, but I'm not 100% sure you are. You might not be.
So I just, hold on, let's hit pause just for a second, because there's a lot going back and forth. So there are two ultimate issues that I want to make sure we're all really clear on. there is, the Biden-Harris administration rewrote the Title IX regulation via the Department of Education. I believe it was April of 2024 that this came out. It was pseudo-vetted, 26 states, as Sue pointed out, did file immediate court injunctive relief. And in the injunctive relief of, I think it was Alaska, Utah,
I have it right here. Louisiana, Mississippi, Kentucky, Kansas, Iowa, Indiana, Idaho, Georgia, Florida,
those are the
Arkansas.
28 states.
Yep. mhm,
So there was
lots.
a separate case that was heard. There's 4 states. I know Alaska and Utah were one of them. And what Sue is referring to is there was an opinion that was handed down because the Moms for Liberty and the female student, the
Athletes
three,
United.
the 3 organizations joined in that case. And when they did, the judge ruled, I actually read the opinion myself and trying to do some preparation. The judge ruled that if a minor student of one of those members was in a school, I actually thought it was district too, by the way, and I have not seen Joe's note yet, I haven't had time, then that district is exempt from the rewrite of the Title IX
Right,
regulation.
rewrite specifically.
It does not mean, what it does is it falls back to the existing regulation that was in effect from 1972 until August 1st of this year. So it basically falls back to the old language. Keep in mind, that's not a forever thing. It's injunctive relief. So what it says is we're going to put a stay on this until courts ultimately decide what's going to happen. Now, there's another case that was heard last year, the Chevron case, which reversed about 40 years of precedent, and it said that regulatory bodies cannot make legislation that violates separation of powers. By the way, social study kids out there, learn your
Chevron
American
case.
government, because it actually comes in handy. It violates separation of powers. There is, now read 2 or 3 things from what I believe to be nonpartisan sort of organizations. And what the judge actually said in this case is there is a high likelihood that the plaintiffs will win on multiple counts that they brought forward. Not all of them, but there was a high likelihood of that happening, which is why he was granting the stay. This could lose, and then it would be the regulation in all 50 states, or the plaintiffs could succeed, at which point the Biden-Harris rewrite would revert back to the original language. So there's a bunch of stuff going on there. That is the federal regulation. As the superintendent pointed out, and again, I said it earlier, we don't have to like the law, but the law is the law, and we have to follow the law. Massachusetts does have a law that includes gender identity
So the
and
2012 Gender Identity Law amended Chapter 76, Section 5 to include gender identification as a protected class. So that has existed here for more than a decade.
for 12 years. So, and that is what it is, right? You know, I mean, if you don't like the law, vote different people into office is what I would say, right? Today, out of all days, to understand that the vote matters and who you put into office absolutely 100% matters. This is, however, where we have a bit of a say. We can't go against the law, and we cannot go against the regulation that we are currently held to. It's what do we tell families so they understand what the requirements are. That is ultimately the question before us. We are not here to arbitrate whether the Title IX rewrite was good or bad. We are not here to arbitrate whether or not the law can or can't be followed. It is what do we ultimately put in the handbook. I struggle immensely with both the law and the rewrite because, in my view, we are basically hurting girls' sports and we are hurting girls in our schools. That is my opinion. I am entitled to it, just like anyone's entitled to their opinion. But I will follow the law. right? And I think that is the key that we all sort of have to understand. So what is the language ultimately that goes in our handbook that can tell parents that there was a shift and there was a change? If, by the way, Pembroke is added to the list of exempt, whether it's schools or districts, my understanding reading the case was it was district, but schools or districts, we will be required to send out additional communication to let parents know that we are no longer subject, or at least while the stay is in place, we are not subject to the current Title IX requirement, but the old Title IX requirement.
And I just want to say that I am in receipt of I know that we have a member in our high school. We have a student who has a parent who's a member in our high school, and I have proof on my phone today that this parent is, in fact, a member of Moms for Liberty. I've asked Moms for Liberty for clarification because they haven't included Pembroke yet. And I think there might have been some sort of a clerical glitch somewhere, the reason why. However, Silver Lake and Hanover are both
Hanover High School, yep.
exempt because of Title IX.
Right, so
exempt
they're
from the-
exempt from the federal regulations, but they're
Right.
not
Not
exempt
exempt
from
from
Yep,
Mass
nope,
General
that's
Law,
very
where
clear.
gender identification
I'm not
is-
trying to say
okay.
otherwise, but I am trying to say that the language in the handbook, in my opinion, could be different. Like, I think that's very strict language. And knowing that we're probably gonna have to change it, well, we'll probably have to send it out another notice anyways. Like, I feel, I looked at that draft that, you sent over to the group, the draft for the non-discrimination.
MCAD, yep.
So, and there's some basic language we could put in instead, because, and I do realize that what you did was you took it from the sexual harassment policy.
Our current policy.
Our current policy, which, doesn't draw out.
Yeah, so sex discrimination didn't exist when this was reviewed the last time.
Right, exactly. And so I feel like that actually maybe needs to be kicked back to
That is on the
policy.
list of policies
Yeah.
to be reviewed.
Right, so, because I feel like the language of whether it is intended or not really changes if we're changing the regulation.
Right, and I
anyways,
think it's
but-
important to understand that the word intent has been in our sexual harassment policy since we've had a sexual harassment policy. It's in the sample for MCAT, it's in the sample for MASC. It existed before November of 2022. Whether or not you want to continue using the word intent in our published policies doesn't matter. Intent comes into the decision-making process always. So just because you didn't intend to hurt somebody's feelings doesn't mean you didn't hurt their feelings, or you didn't intend to bully them, but you bullied them. And so obviously intent comes into play when you're talking about the egregiousness or the seriousness of a situation. It also comes into play at times when you're talking about what the consequence is. But because you didn't intend to do something doesn't mean that we get to do nothing.
And of course, and I'm not saying that, what I'm saying is that having it in the handbook, any student can be like, well, so-and-so, called me this, and, now I feel triggered, or whatever,
And we
you don't want
investigate
somebody-
every single one of those
Of
things.
course you do, and you probably would never side with something that was like that.
We hear some crazy things.
I'm sure you hear crazy things, and I'm sure you would never punish someone. But my fear is something will go in their file. Oh, this so and so has an allegation of sexual harassment. Based on something simple like accidentally. Maybe it's a student going in from, maybe they've just recently transitioned, and another student didn't know or something and accidentally misgendered. Like, that's so unintended, but we're in a sort of a new world. So I'm just saying, like, the allegation of it is enough, in my opinion. So therefore,
an
I feel
allegation
that.
doesn't show up in anyone's
That's what I was
file,
gonna say.
right? That doesn't show up in anyone's
trying to
record. You
tell
have
you.
to be, it has to be proven or decided that you have sexually harassed someone for it to show up in your permanent record.
But we don't need to put it in the handbook necessarily, because I don't think that
Because it's in our
that's-
policy, right, so we don't have to.
Yeah.
I
So
totally
I
agree
feel
with
like we
that,
should
but
go with I think we should go with the bare minimum language that the federal government is suggesting
Totally
for
fine.
Title IX. And, there's like a paragraph in, there's like a one paragraph piece. I can read it if you'd like.
Right, but I just, want everyone to understand, even though it's not in your handbook, our policy has the word intent and non-intended, which means
Right.
that's the bar.
And then we'll be looking at it as a committee, so we can deal with that later.
Sue, I just want to, I know
Sure.
Katrina was
Yeah.
trying to jump in.
Sorry,
No, go
yeah, I was
ahead.
just gonna say, if it's found to be, whatever the word is, like, not an instance of.
Non-founded, yeah.
Non-founded, then it would not be in their record.
No.
From that point on, or it shouldn't be, because there's nothing that was found, so, that was just my point.
Yeah.
What was
What'd you
that,
say?
Mary Beth?
There's just way more to it than intent, right? So to be
Yeah.
found guilty of sexual
Sexual
harassment,
Of
you
course.
have to prove a number of elements that have, intent is really one piece of it perhaps, but you have to prove that what happened was so severe, so pervasive, and so objectionable to a reasonable person that a student lost their education, or something in their education.
Right,
The bar is
absolutely.
extremely high.
And I'm not saying it's not, and I'm not trying to argue that point. My point is simply that to have it in the handbook, you could be tied up with Title IX, allegations just from it being like a lot of people misunderstanding what it says in the handbook, because when I'm looking at it, it says whether intended or not, so lots of people might consider, parents could be calling in, my child, blah, 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 in the class, and this person said.
That's not a bad thing. I feel like having as much information at people's hands, like this is what part of our job is, to have define things that we might not understand or agree with. But if it's the law, and if it's helping students and helping, like it's quoting 90% of definition, so why not have information easily available to people? I can
Because
understand
it's-
if there's parts that you might disagree with that you think is going to, but if this is protecting students and protecting parents and allowing parents to be able to read it, to ask questions about different things. I mean, if there's parts or something, but I think in general, having definitions and information
But I don't
is
think
not-
they're the correct definitions, that's why, and it's not taken from the
From-
draft that was the thing
But
from the
what
US Department.
definitions don't you agree with?
The intent or not piece.
But that's already in our policy.
But that's a policy that's going to be reviewed, and I
But
just.
it has
still-
been reviewed 3 times in the
But it
past
is
2
our
years.
policy.
I just don't think we need all the extra language. I think over explaining it is going to cause more chaos rather than less. I think we already have some very strict language in the handbook, and I don't see why we need to change it unless, other than to just
Because
comply with the law.
I also went down the rabbit hole, but, sexual harassment for women in the workplace was a huge problem. I remember hearing stories from my mom about what was just like normal. I remember in high school, I don't know, just having like your bra strap snapped, like sitting in the classroom and having that happen and wanting to punch a kid in the face.
Sure.
And
Not that you're condoning violence.
so, but the things that used to be accepted for, multiple layers, it takes a while to understand it. I don't claim or pretend to know and understand, my first read of this was like, why is this in the elementary level? And then I remember we might have 11, 12, maybe, probably not 13 in our elementary schools. So some of this could, be for, so I'm having a hard time understanding if it's already partly in our policy, why giving definitions?
Okay, let me throw this back on you
a
then,
problem.
something that you asked me before. If there's, well, let me just ask Erin, are there currently issues where this needs definition, or have you found that the handbook hasn't been enough to address these issues?
I think if we're thinking of the handbook as a resource, I think it's important to tell families how to file a complaint.
I know, but
That's not been in our handbook, but we have it on our website.
But has there been complaints of this nature that the handbook hasn't been able to address?
No, I don't.
So if that's the case, then why do we need to change it other than to comply with the law?
Right, and I think what I hope that you hear me saying is that you don't have to make any changes to the handbook at all. And we're still gonna do what we've always done when it comes to a complaint. And
Right.
so,
Exactly.
So do we
but
want more
is
information
the
or
handbook a
less?
resource or not? Because you could strip down, I don't know, the high school handbook is 71 pages, you could make it 15, right?
Well, but it's a resource that, for something that is not currently an issue and hasn't been an issue to what you just said.
We've had more Title IX investigations in the past 24 months than
But
we've had
nothing
in-
that the handbook doesn't currently cover.
Right, but what was found when we had a Title IX investigation outcome that was challenged was that our grievance procedures needed to be part of our policy, needed to be readily available on our website. So I guess I would ask, why then wouldn't you put it in the handbook if the legal opinion was that you need to get the information out to families
But
on how to
I'm
file?
saying that we could do like this like one paragraph that is recommended by the
That's
Department
totally
of
fine.
Education rather than this, just so that we're
Right,
complying
and
with
as
the
long
law.
as we understand that, we would still be thinking sex discrimination is still prohibited by law.
Of course.
Gender identification is a protected class, whether the action or was intended or unintended, all of that is still part of the conversation. But to me, that goes back to my first question, is what is the purpose of a handbook?
So I'd love to jump in on that, but
Yeah.
before I do, David, I'd like to give you the opportunity to give your thoughts or opinion.
You know, you sit here and listen to a lot of this, and, you know, what I don't want to do is turn the handbook into the yellow pages, and I'm showing my age here, because some people may not know what the yellow pages is. You know, we could put a million things, and I said it's 71 pages.
The high school one is
The high
that
school
long.
one, no, but I'm saying.
The others
but
are a little
That's a lot of information, and I think a lot of the gender stuff comes up mostly when it comes to sports. You know, from what I see, and again, because we're not privy to a lot of things that happen, you know, kind of behind the scenes, but the ones that, let's say the ones that get the publicity are sports. You know, that I'm aware of. Again, there could be 100 things going on here. I don't think by law we're supposed to technically know about them. You know, it's such a slippery slope that I think you give someone an adequate amount of information. I don't think we have to go into great detail. It's all there, like you said, whether it's the state, the Fed, you know, the information is there. I just don't want to make this process any harder than it has to be. You know, it's a little bit of, you know, not oversimplifying with the KISS principle, you know, keep it simple, stupid. Let's make it kind of straightforward. Let's not clutter it up. Let's not do, you know, don't overthink it. And, I mean, we're going to go back and forth here for a half hour, 45 minutes. You know, do we put something in the handbook or not? I just, you know, I just don't think, as I said, it's all there. It's already out, it's already in the public eye, you know. I don't say leave it alone, that doesn't sound right, but, you know,
I understand.
there we go.
Katrina, did you have something?
Yeah, I just saw in the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination that was provided, it does say, this is from 9/16/2017, and it does say whether intended or not in the last paragraph. So I just wanted to
Right, and I
bring
think
that.
that's some of the communication that I had with Joe after the last meeting, was it doesn't, what matters is where does the complaint go when it's not settled here, right? What is the
Right.
bar at MCAD? What is the bar at Department of Labor Relations? What is the bar we're going to be held to? And then working backwards from that and what amount of information should be shared where, so that people are informed. If we had no policy and no handbook language, then we would have a hard time proving anything, ever
Right.
getting anything in our
Right.
favor, right?
Go ahead.
So I'm
No,
kind of having
please.
a little bit of hard time too, like, who's talked to Joe, because I haven't, and I
Yeah.
haven't gotten anything, so I'm kind of having a hard time with that portion of this, that some people, and I understand.
I
the
talk to
chair-
Joe all the time,
No, and
daily,
and
almost.
that's
Okay, so-
appropriate in our policy, that the chair and, you know, obviously superintendent, but I'm kind of having a hard time with the fact that we're not all privy to what's being told from the
Yeah.
attorney
So-
on this too, because, I mean,
Yep.
to me, like, I appreciate, you know, the perspectives, I, you know, want to hear from them, but what are we asking to do at this point? Like, so, Sue, like, if we put the language that I haven't seen it, what you're referencing, if we, like, how does that change one parent of a Mom for Liberty student or student of I had it reversed. What does that change, like, what is that going to gain us by not giving people the information? Whether we agree with it or not, what does your definition change about this possibility? Like, why bring that Mom for Liberty up into this if it doesn't
hold on.
change anything? And I'm having a really hard time with the whole attorney
So,
privilege.
okay, so
part
hold
Can I
of
just clarify,
that.
the reason why any language was added to the handbook was because it was Joe's suggestion. So the August 1st deadline was approaching. We had not made any recommendations to change our policies because there were no samples available on August 1st,
There was
believe it or
nothing.
not. And he said that his recommendation in the place to start was to get the definitions into the student handbook. So that's how this started, and that's what policy sub discussed when we met in July, was getting the definitions.
All right, hold on. I'm going to call time off a second, because we had about 12 questions that are thrown on the table, and I want to make sure they all get answered. So I'm going to answer your first question, right? So going forward, everything that goes to Joe will come through me. Period. End of discussion, right? I do think, Sue had a very specific question. She talked to Aaron. Aaron put her in touch with Joe to get that specific question answered, right? I talked to Aaron also, and no matter what it is legally, it should go through the chair of the committee for the exact purposes. And Sue wasn't doing anything wrong. Sue was actually trying to find out legally, what is this and what does it mean? And was doing her due diligence. I completely respect that. But going forward, whoever sits in this seat, all the legal stuff should go through them, or there should be a question to the chair of, hey, is there any, do you mind if I reach out? Which has happened
But should it not
historically
be
too.
shared?
100%,
Yeah, like
right?
that's
But
where-
100%. I don't think any of that, by the way, was meant not to be shared. This has been very dynamic over the last 10 days with a holiday in the middle. I don't think any of it was meant not to be shared. There was an email that you said Joe sent today. I haven't even read it yet.
But keep in mind, your communications with your attorney are not public.
Are
record.
not
So-
public record.
So it isn't necessarily all intended to be shared.
No, but something like this to make sure all members of the body have the same data and information.
Right,
as
if you're
we're
asking
making
Joe to give a
decision,
legal opinion and he
is-
sends something, it should be shared
That's
with
exactly right,
everybody.
should be,
Yeah.
yes. So the answer, Allison, is yes. You've asked why not have all the definitions in the handbook, and you asked what the purpose of the handbook is. So I am going to give you, rightfully, I'm just going to say it outright, a biased viewpoint on this, but I'm going to do my best to be fair about it, right? So the handbook is supposed to be a reference guide and a reference tool for students and parents to understand what their requirements are and what our requirements ultimately are. And it should always be aligned with both our policy and the law. And so understandably, when the law changes, we are trying to inform parents, which is incredibly important to your point, right? To inform parents and make sure that people understand that there has been a change, there has been a shift, and this is what it is. I do think that because of the content of the changes in the Title IX legislation, legal counsel suggested that they be added to the handbook, and I do believe it is the content. We didn't list the Massachusetts law that I remember in all this detail with all the legal definitions that were in that law from 2012 until current day. I actually haven't seen this many definitions put in from a regulatory perspective. It may have been, it's been a long time, but I think it was the content of the rewrite, right? I actually also take issue with putting this much data in the handbook because we traditionally don't do it and haven't done it. I think if the Department of Education is recommending and saying that this is sufficient and this suffices, we can put content in there that says the Title IX legislation has changed effective August 1st. Here's a link, right? Which I think is not a bad idea. And then the recommended language from the Department of Education, I mean, if that's the governing body and they're saying this is sufficient, that can go in, we meet our legal standard, I think to your earlier point on the item. I also think, however, that the number of challenges to the current regulation may invalidate a lot of this, right? Or to your point, one school may be subject, one not. I mean, it's almost getting out of hand, right? But that is the environment that we're in. So having this much detail may be too much, but to your point, you have to tell parents something has shifted and something has changed. I don't recall us doing it in this much detail, but it still provides a reference, a link, and an indication that this is under challenge. If we put nothing in, and this is important for us to understand, I think what Aaron's point is the right one, because you could have 0 pages dedicated to this, and if a Title IX violation happens, this yellow rewrite, can I just use your
Yeah, of
thing
course.
here, right? This is what Jess is gonna do, because this is what she's required currently to do by the regulation. And even if this isn't here, Jess has to follow the Massachusetts law, right? So I do think that there is a point that there is a midpoint to this, right? Where we can say, we need to inform parents something has shifted and changed. We need to provide some information as to what that is, and there should at least be a link to the actual regulation because it's new. I think if new legislation comes up, we should do something very similar. It feels like, and this is to answer your other question, for me, I think this was a backdoor federal way, forget Massachusetts. This has nothing to do with Pembroke, right? It really doesn't, because we're covered under the Massachusetts law. This was a backdoor federal way of the current administration invoking an ideological viewpoint in this area nationally to all schools and universities. The other thing that's hard is this is targeted, from what I'm reading now, at a university level, but applies to school districts. And it makes it even more complicated because you talk about a 4 or 5-year-old kid and a 22-year-old kid are subject to the same regulation. Those are very different potential types of things. So it's almost a microcosm of the country right now, this debate, right? And it's good to have it, but we ultimately have to decide with what we as a body are comfortable in the handbook, because I got to bring it back to us in Pembroke, right? So the question really becomes, and I am going to ask you to read the paragraph, right? But the question becomes, do we leave it as is? Do we change it? And if we change it, how do we change it? So,
Yeah,
please.
my question would be, what's the cost if we do, and what's the cost if we don't?
Great.
Yeah.
It's the right question, right? So, can you answer Katrina's question? What she's saying is, if we just leave it,
Leave it meaning with the edits or
Wait.
leaving it without the edits?
Without saying anything.
so.
Which I don't
no,
even
I'm
think is
sorry.
an option.
Let's
No,
define
wait.
what each
That's
thing
fine.
means.
Yeah.
If we left the handbook as you presented it with the edits, actually, what is the cost to doing that, or is there any additional risk or anything else?
No, and I think to Sue's point, I mean, obviously, I have the ability to use my computer in the meeting because I can get on the internet. But even in school districts that have some schools with Moms for Liberty students, it is still up to the school district if they choose to implement the 2024 Title IX regulations. You can still choose, even in schools that have students that are in Moms for
But
Liberty.
that would be a vote around
Right,
this table.
that's for you all. There's no risk for keeping it in, and in all honesty, there's no risk for taking it out. My suggestion would be if this language makes you extremely uncomfortable, I'm worried about what it looks like when we get to some of the policy revisions that we need to talk about, but we're not there yet. But I would just argue, to your point, Patrick, that we put in something that says Title IX regulations have changed. Here's a link, just like we have a link to our bullying and intervention plan.
Here's the other thing I'm going to throw out to think about, right? In sort of taking the lightning rod pieces of this out a little bit, right? Because it doesn't have to be divisive. We're having a conversation, and I think you've got a couple of members around the table that aren't super comfortable with the language in the new regulation or how it came to be, right? Again, we cannot like it, but we have to abide by it. But how we communicate it is ultimately up to us. For me, the thing that worries me is it could all change in a week. It could all change in a month. And having this much detail and this much data out there when it could all shift and change. And we haven't done it historically at this level of detail. right? We haven't,
Well,
though.
there's definitions in here, right? We define
But
suspension,
we've
in-school
linked.
suspension.
Well,
No,
okay,
there's full
I'm sorry,
definitions
that-
in here.
okay, yes,
And so
but-
anytime there's a change to the discipline law, 37H, H and a half, H and 3/4, we go into extensive detail about that.
the
But
change.
this is.
Right, before there was just
From a federal regulatory
right.
thing, we had a link
Right.
and a blurb, right? Which is what we have.
That's what
Are we
Our
allowed
goal
to
is-
say this is, and I hate to, I'm not sure if the language is correct,
Contested.
an evolving policy
Right.
or matter?
But it's
That-
not in Massachusetts,
Right.
that's the problem.
Well, again, but we're saying, you're saying this could be overturned, this could be changed. Maybe we put a thing about, here is Massachusetts, the federal,
The way-
I'm just saying, I'm not
I
saying we
would
have to.
recommend
just,
linking the Title IX stuff as well as Mass General Law, Chapter 76.
I agree.
There you go.
Chapter 5.
On
There
the
you go.
t-
There we go.
On the top of the U.S. Department of Ed documents, it actually lists out all the states, like it's a little red piece of information at the top, which I think is fairly current, talking about what is happening, so we might just take that language.
I'd be, even
I
be.
wouldn't put that in handbook.
You wouldn't, or
I
would?
wouldn't.
No, because it's
it
not
can
related to
change and shift.
Massachusetts.
That's right. And-
Okay.
And it's also not, again,
Yeah.
look, my other feeling on this is why a federal judge said these states can stay and these can't, it's insanity. We're now splitting the nation up between those that jump on and those that don't, and it's law here, but it's not here, it's required here, it's not here.
Agreed.
Can you read the paragraph, because we all gotta know what
Where
this
did it
stuff
come
says.
from?
Yeah.
It came,
It
so
comes from the
Aaron
document
sent,
that
Aaron
Aaron
sent the
sent
document.
called,
It
give
it
me
was
a
the
minute, I'll tell
Department
you
of
what it is.
Education suggested,
No, so
basically
all I gave you was
minimum
MCAD.
thing. Yeah.
I didn't give
I
you
will-
the DESC. I
No,
didn't give you
no, it's
MASC.
Originally,
Hold on,
one that
if
you
I have
had
it
the
here.
blurb at the top.
Wait, I downloaded it, hold on.
These are this one? The GBAA sexual harassment one?
No, no, no,
No,
no,
it's
no,
on-
that's our policy. So, actually,
It's the U.S. Department of Education document to help you draft policies.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's one of the resources that.
Yeah,
that
Yeah,
gets
it's
I
one
have
of the
it, yeah.
resources, and it says,
Those
let me
are
just get
helpful.
back to my
Thank
other
you.
page, hold on. Word. And it says, ABC school, which would be Pembroke Public Schools, does not discriminate on the basis of sex and prohibits sex discrimination in any education program or activity that it operates as required by Title IX and its regulations, including in admissions and employment. Inquiries about Title IX may be referred to ABC Schools Title IX Coordinator, the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, or both. ABC Schools Title IX Coordinator is, and then name, address, so forth. ABC Schools non-discrimination policy and grievance procedures can be located at, and then include link to location, on website, or otherwise describe locations. To report information about conduct that may constitute sex discrimination or make a complaint of sex discrimination under Title IX, please refer to, include link to locations on websites or otherwise describe locations.
Yeah.
And that comes directly from
And this-
page 3.
This is the fact sheet one?
I think it's this one, the resource for,
The resource for
Yeah, it is
drafting
the resource. It was one of the
non-discrimination.
yeah.
Right, and I think the only thing that I would add to that is that you just have to cite the Mass General Law too.
Right,
was our-
right.
No,
our law
And
I,
it's like, yeah,
I
exactly.
agree with you that you do, right? I think you've got to have both the law and the regulation, because even if this new Title IX thing is completely invalidated, the law's still the law, right?
Yeah.
And we still have to follow the law at the end of the day. But I think it's really important for folks to understand, we're not making this decision. We're making the decision of how to most effectively communicate it.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think you end up in situations where you provide a lot of information of, well, why did they do that? Why was that? Like, folks aren't Title IX experts, right?
Right.
We all learned a lot in the last 2 weeks,
I know,
right?
yeah.
By doing the research,
I feel like
right?
I'm ready to get my law degree.
right?
But I think it's like the other thing that I think is really clear, the spirit of this regulation back from 1972 to current, I don't hear anybody saying they disagree with, right? Nobody wants men or women in our district to be discriminated against for any reason whatsoever, whether it be, sexual orientation, sex discrimination, gender discrimination, religious discrimination, anything, right? So I don't know that anybody has that issue at all. I think that there was an expansion. That expansion got pushed out there very quickly. That piece has made people uncomfortable, but the law is still the law. So, go
So I
ahead,
guess the question I have, so if we put that language in
with a link to the.
with the link, how does that from, like, the whole thing with the Moms for Liberty, with the student, like, it,
No, that's a good question.
that doesn't change anything.
Doesn't
So
change
to
anything.
me, and again, I would, you know, I definitely have learned having to look up what things are and how they apply to everyday life. And I definitely appreciate too many words, people don't read it. I definitely have seen that plenty of times. So my question is, what are we accomplishing by putting less words in?
So-
Because it doesn't change the whole Moms for Liberty injunctions, whatever, because we still have the law of Massachusetts that we still have to apply. So
There's two things though. that
do we
would-
put on our website, like, because, you know, things, outside links can change, right? So do we put the current laws on Pembroke's website that we then link to people to give them these definitions? Are we gonna have disagreements? Do we have to come up with what that language has to look like? Like, what does changing it accomplish, given
What does
concerns?
not changing it accomplish? Like, I mean, I think I get to ask the reverse question. It's like, why, I mean, we've been doing just fine with no complaints to this point. With, you know, so why?
Knowledge is
Hold-
power,
Hold
I
on,
guess,
there
is
is,
my-
there is a small difference though. And there is a small difference in that the regulation changed, right? So it is an opportunity to figure out how you communicate the change of regulation. I think that's, I personally think that's reasonable. But you asked an earlier question though, and I don't want it to get lost. If Pembroke is added to the Moms of Liberty listing, right, we would then need to make a determination of whether or not we are going to continue with the Title IX new regulation or revert back to the old regulation, whether it be in this specific school or district. I just don't know that legal answer yet, and that question is not currently before us. But if Pembroke were added to that list, we would have to take an action. We absolutely would do that. If that changed and that shifted, there could be a communication, there could be an update to the handbook. I think what this prevents is 4 pages of updates as opposed to a paragraph of updates. Or if a federal judge decides to grant a stay across the country, it is a paragraph change and not multiple segments. Your definitions are still accessible via the link. In the law,
But do we agree that that the definitions can be on the website?
well, I think the link is on the website, which takes you to all of that data. Does it not, Jess? I want to make sure.
Yeah, so it'll take you to like the federal or the mass law. Some of the other links that have been in our handbook and our website are to our grievance procedures, which are on the
Policy page.
previous, and under student services, under Title IX, some of the previous requirements are the grievance, which is,
So we would continue to link to whatever's already in place until those things get updated in our policy.
100%. That's what we have to do.
Correct. I think, to your point of what does it matter if we add it or don't add it, I just want to clarify, we're talking about 1 page of edits, and it's not 4 pages of edits. But I think by reducing the words, it's more in line with the style of the handbook, linking to resources as opposed to explaining it. I just want to point out to folks that we have been referencing sexual harassment in the code of conduct at the middle school and high school in our handbooks forever without defining it, right? So, I mean, it's not the end of the world to not define it within the handbook, but to have people go to a resource to define it.
Sure. And remind me, I don't think this has changed, but our council recommended us to add what you have in there right now.
The definitions, because the change for us and I use the word change because I can't think of what another one would be, is that we've never discerned the difference between sexual harassment and sexual discrimination.
Which I think is part of like the huge piece of the,
Right.
of the difference with this, so that
Right.
feels like an
The
important.
new
But the things that are
regulations-
listed as sexual discrimination would have fallen under our discrimination policy before. It
Okay,
just didn't.
okay.
So the Title IX then changes that came into effect on August 1st is the Title IX change to sexual discrimination that may include sexual harassment. So it's more the umbrella and then understanding kind of the implications of defining those things.
Yeah, because also I looked at, MASC has some, and I can send these to you guys
No,
after,
we have
but
them, yeah.
an example of different policies that you would look at in policy sub, and like the biggest difference is the difference between the word discrimination and harassment.
Right, so I
Like everywhere.
updated all those in the presentation. I just
Yeah.
listed ones that we would have to, under the new regulations, update, and then ones that we
We'd have
would
to
need
add.
to
Right.
kind of add or kind of, and so Erin has kind of what, I used MASC's kind of.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that that delineation gets in there, because I think that's an important piece. Whether or not we do all the definitions, I think, I'm not saying one way or another, but I want to make sure that the difference in discrimination versus harassment, as well as that our grievance procedure has to change, or,
I think we would have to link to the grievance procedure.
yeah.
Based on the current
current, yeah.
regulation, right?
Mhm.
And if that were to shift or change, whether it be,
Which that's already in here.
right, if it were to shift or change, then
Yeah,
we would
then we'll
have
do
to
it then,
update it,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So what if we, instead of completely like deleting, still leave like the first paragraph, but then, and then under sexual harassment and discrimination, leave the definition of sexual harassment, leave the definition of sexual discrimination, and leave the procedures and complaint, and take out the bullets.
The examples?
What?
The examples
Yeah,
of what
take
they
out the bullets.
What page are you on?
24, I'm on
The
the
elementary
elementary.
handbook.
Of the elementary.
It's the same everywhere, but the
Okay,
elementary
yeah. So I'm on-
handbook,
I'm
the
on-
elementary
I'm on
handbook still, the
elementary,
page
so-
numbers are right, so.
Got it.
And taking it to, because I feel like we still need to, I think since this is a new thing, separating sexual harassment and sexual discrimination, if you were to quiz me on which is which, I might not be able
Right.
to tell you right now. So having at least those two definitions
Uh-huh.
along with, just basically repeating federal, and state law, and leave the procedure for complaint and harassment, and leaving the link to the procedures, and maybe add a link to,
So let me ask you a question. Is
Something.
is that one of the changes that we're proposing for the policy is what's in that first paragraph? Is that going to go into policy?
What are you saying, this being
Uh,
sexual harassment is defined as?
Yes.
That's already
Yes.
in your policy.
It's
so
already in
not
our
a
policy,
change. Yeah.
so, so for me, it's already in our policy, and I don't know why we'd need to add it. Like, we
You
have
can
some.
link to our policy.
for.
You could certainly, yeah,
Sexual
link to the
harassment.
policy is what I think, like, it's how, if we have our handbook so thick that and this is an elementary handbook now you're looking at,
No,
right?
I
And it's so
understand.
thick that, like, how is a student, if we continue to add pages and pages,
I guess
I don't know,
the
it's-
question that I ultimately have that still I don't know is answered, and if it is, I apologize for missing it. I don't understand why we're going into this much detail here.
We already
when-
discussed it and
when-
approved it
when-
at policy, so.
No.
Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I understand that the current policy was back in '22 with the revision in '23. I do think, to your point, we need to look at it again. Times change, especially in this area, very quickly. But what we're proposing putting in the handbook seems very detailed, and the impetus is the Title IX federal regulation change. It just seems strange to me.
Well, I think,
So I think you can just cut it and do bare minimum. You can leave, I think the first paragraph is important because it tells you to, that meaning like under discrimination, tells you who to contact. It's just as
Yeah,
contact information.
well,
But then I think you can say that the Title IX federal regulations have changed, to discern between sexual harassment and sexual discrimination and just link it right to that.
I like that.
yeah, I
That
do
works,
too.
as long
Because-
as we.
Then people can, I also think you should link to our current policy on
I-
sexual harassment
And the law.
and the
MGL.
MGL 76.5 and the Title IX
Yep.
So to be clear, what we're saying here is, hold on, let me just write this down to summarize.
Someone is gonna say it slowly and clearly so that the
Slowly
record
and
picks it
clearly.
up, so that.
Poor Natalie's like,
for the
I hate
record.
these
So
meetings,
just
right?
to be clear, we can't, do we have to vote on, we can't do a second read again, like get a second draft, a third draft?
I think the idea here is we need to get the handbooks
No, I
out,
totally
right?
appreciate that, but
I
I
mean,
just,
but-
I have a hard time voting on something I can't read.
No, that's right. So I'm gonna, so this paragraph right here, discrimination, Title IX and civil rights. Federal law prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender, disability, and educational programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance. In accordance with the requirements of Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, the Pembroke Public Schools hereby make notice that it does not discriminate in any educational programs or activities or in employment therein. Jessica D. Lorenzo and Michael Murphy of the Pembroke Public School District, telephone number inserted, have been designated as the employees responsible for coordinating the Pembroke Public Schools' effort to implement this non-discriminatory policy. And then we would have a link to the new Title IX regulation, because we are subject to it, our current policy, GBAA, and the Massachusetts non-discrimination law that has been there since 2012. That's it. That's what would be in
So,
the handbook.
reading the one that we're Sue has read off of it, and I just want to read this. So, the 2024 amendments also require that each recipient to provide a notice of non-discrimination to students, parents, guardians, and other
That's
authorized
what's in
leaders.
here.
So is that enough
Yes.
to
Yes.
make
Yes.
that
Yes.
requirement?
Yes.
So just saying that
That we
Yes.
do not
covers
discriminate,
us.
yes.
And that's always been a
Yeah.
requirement, right? I mean, that's, ironically, I don't think that's new. The new pieces of the Title IX legislation is the things that I think have some of us uncomfortable.
So that first paragraph stating, I think it, like, the next heading should be additional resources, and then you just state
The
that
links.
the links,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that the Title IX federal regulations have changed to discern between sexual harassment and sexual discrimination, and then include the links.
Yep.
Are you okay with that statement, that the federal regulations have changed to discern between sexual
You
harassment and
have to.
sexual
Yeah,
discrimination?
I think that's
I
fine.
think you have to say that,
And
So
the
just,
current federal regulation.
the high school handbook
Or
is
new.
not that little blurb that you guys just
we have
read.
to
That's what I
add
was
that.
flipping
Yes.
through, so I just want to make sure.
No, no,
whatever
no, we
you-
understand.
That confused me
What?
too. I had to go to the elementary
No,
one.
no, no,
It's
but,
the-
but I think what we're saying, what,
they need to be the same.
yeah, what we're
Yes,
saying is
agree.
we would
The
put
blurb.
this in, and that's all we would
All
put in
handbooks.
to all of the handbooks. Right? So we would remove
What
everything
page
else
is it
that's
on?
in.
On this?
24.
Elementary is 24.
No, I'm sorry, on the high school.
It's not in the high school.
It's not there.
Every page in the high school handbook is page 19, Allison.
I know,
and it's
I
on
did
page
notice
19.
But it is in here.
I didn't see it in there.
No, that's,
It's on page 19.
in there, but
Oh, it is?
that heading,
Which
that
page
first
19?
blurb is not there.
Halfway through.
Title IX information is there.
So
that we can
what,
talk about.
ironically, what we did in the high school handbook is we put all the definitions and everything else, and we didn't put that blurb in. I actually think that blurb is the important piece.
So
Yeah.
this
Right.
blurb has always been in there.
In
and
the
then
elementary handbook,
In
yep.
addition, yeah, is the red line in the in the high school.
So that's why it wasn't
handbook.
redlined,
Yeah, it
which is why it's not
wasn't
jumping out.
supposed to be
Jess, that's
both.
fair. That's fine.
Okay. Yep.
So the proposal, interestingly enough, that I'm getting from a couple of you, would be to include the paragraph that I just read, discrimination of Title IX and civil rights, with an additional line that explains that the Title IX regulation,
Federal regulations
federal
have changed
regulations
to discern
have
between
changed.
sexual harassment and sexual discrimination.
correct, and then we would have the links.
So how does that change the high school one that has already existed with different? Are we taking out stuff? Like procedure of complaint or investigation that
Yes.
was not redlined?
Those are regular discrimination and nothing to do with sexual.
No, that's just regular. That has
Okay.
always been.
No,
in.
So-
so all of this
so-
would states, the
Okay.
red line
That's
would
under
go.
bullying and harassment, and
So,
that-
so
there's no
this red
change
line
there.
would go,
Okay.
and this would be inserted.
I definitely can, agree with this. I personally just have a really hard time not seeing it in writing before I vote on it. That's just me. but I understand that, that's,
So, Aaron, what I'd ask you to do is when we make these amendments and adjustments, to send them out before we publish, do a final publishing.
that's fine.
Just send them out. If you see something there that you believe we did not just talk about, let Erin know, and she will come to me. And if and we'll hold that one, or we can call
and are
a
we,
meeting if we need to.
sorry if I missed it, so are we
That's right.
leaving the procedure of complaint investigation, are we leaving that paragraph?
I'm gonna link it.
It's gonna all
It's
be
part of
there.
our policy.
But we're not leaving the words?
Correct.
No.
Okay, see, I disagree with that. I think we should leave, that's leaving how to do something.
No, it would say procedures of complaint investigation, it would link to them. So that heading would be
click
there
on
and it
it.
would link.
It'd be a link, but you'd
But
still
why-
have a link.
But why not just leave those words there? So
Because
that,
if that changes, it's easier to move the link.
but is the procedure gonna change?
It could, right? So right
Yeah.
now, we do a
Or we
dual
may not be
investigator. You
subject
can
to
go
it.
to a single investigator. You can go to a single decision maker. I'm not necessarily recommending any of those changes,
But I don't think any of that says, this doesn't say that. What I'm
Well, but
reading
the
doesn't
new-
say that.
Right, and that's the whole point, like, could change.
But,
Like,
but this is broad. This is not specific.
So the
Right.
specifics go into the grievance procedures, which you guys would have to approve as a part of policy in the
right.
past.
Yeah.
So right now, it's just linking to our current procedures.
I don't see what the hesitation of leaving the procedure of complaint and
Because we're adding
investigation.
it, and there's no point in adding it, especially if it's gonna change, like if,
But I don't know how is that what in this paragraph is gonna change? I mean,
So
it
what-
has her name in it. That's
what-
the only
what-
that's the only thing that ever would change out of this.
No, why don't we do this, right? So what I'm hearing is there are two proposals on the table. There is the first one, which was the paragraph of discrimination, Title IX and civil rights, with a link to Title IX, the current policy and the law, in a blurb that says Title IX has changed. I don't
Yep,
have the
I
exact
understand.
blurb in that,
I wrote
right?
it down.
The second one would be to do that and include the provisions of complaint and investigation, as well as everything I just said. And those are the two things that I'm hearing you guys kind of put forward. So let's take these sort of one at a time, because, and I'm trying to figure out, do you want to vote on both of them? Do you want to talk about them for a little bit more? How do you want to handle it?
I still feel hard. I don't feel, and again, it's the same thing I already said, but I don't feel comfortable without seeing it in writing. It's gonna that's just how
I understand.
I think there's
especially
some,
something this.
I really like
Hold-
Patrick's
hold-
suggestion.
Hold on, I just.
Sorry, yeah, I stopped.
Katrina jumped in, I just
Um,
wanted to.
I apologize, you were still talking and so I stopped
No.
myself. This is from the Department of Ed, the brief overview of key provisions of the Department of Ed's 2024 Title IX final rule has different pieces, like it says, it clarifies blank, and there's like little pieces of each of those that I think could be like a bulleted list that we might consider also putting in there potentially, that really calls out the differences. And I think that's the piece where it might take more time, but I think we might consider doing that as a way to make it more accessible.
I think you guys should consider doing that as part of your policy.
For
So-
policy.
Can I
That
just say
policy should
one thing?
encompass all of these changes. Most of it's in the grievance procedure, and that's
Yeah.
like the step-by-step. That's
Okay.
the really nitty-gritty of, you file a complaint with me,
10
this
days
is what
to do
I
this,
do,
you have
this is
5
what
days
I'm
to do that.
obligated to do, this is what your rights are. That's really like the
Okay.
procedural pieces.
And that's the piece that you were talking about, right? There, a little bit,
The
it's
grievance
procedure.
procedures get given to a complaint. So if somebody contacts me, whether verbally or in writing, we lead them to the grievance procedures. I like overemphasize them and give them a hard copy, we email it, we refer to our website. That's where you're gonna get in, if approved with changes at
Okay.
policy.
Okay.
Sub and here, the changes that would be in place within kind of those procedures.
Okay, got it.
And that's like you said, that's a battle for a different day. Like, we can talk about that at a different day after you've gone through policy sub or whatever, but like I don't know that, I think Patrick's suggestion was good, like if Erin sends us what we, what we suggested, and one of us has a big disagreement with what, like, says, oh, this isn't what we discussed, then we call, maybe we can even do like a quick virtual meeting or something, just to like, talk about or something, just specifically that, I
We can do the
don't know.
virtual, we'll have an in-person meeting if we have to. So here's the thing, right? Part of what I'm trying to do is figure out a compromise so that we can get the handbooks published, right? Because we are now in the,
It's only been 3 days of school.
Week of school, been 3 days, fair enough, right? So we do want to get the handbooks published, right? I think we have a past practice that would indicate sort of what we do and how we handle these things, which is what I'm trying to drive to. Having said that, each one of you has to vote the way you think is the right thing to do and to move things forward in the right way. I think to your point, a lot of those things would go into the policy, that the policy has to be looked at, policy has to be reviewed. I think policy sub has to also understand the feelings around the table and, take into consideration everybody's thoughts on this. But we can vote on both. We can vote on one first and one second. We can vote on neither. This is up to you guys. I'm just kind of steering it.
I think it would make sense to vote and then also have the option to see it later
Okay.
and then adjust it
So-
if needed later.
So why don't we do this? The first one that we actually talked about, we'll take them in order. If the first one passes, you don't go to the second. But since the very first thing that we threw out was including the discrimination Title IX and civil rights paragraph with the blurb that it is changed and adjusted, a link to Title IX, which would include the definitions, the current policy, GBAA, and the current Massachusetts law would all be linked, and it would be in each of the handbooks in a uniform way. So can I get a motion to move that language forward for the handbook?
So moved. Second.
Okay, so motion from David, seconded by Sue. Is there any other discussion? So if you don't mind, it gets confusing with eyes and everything else. Katrina?
What was the second option? I'm
So,
sorry.
I'm sorry, no, that's
Compare.
fair. The second option would be everything that we have here, and can you read that, Allison?
Oh, and add the procedure of complaint and investigation of harassment or discrimination under Title IX. And add that
So,
paragraph.
if you vote no, we're gonna go to that.
Okay,
right?
got it.
If you vote yes, and enough people vote yes, we're not gonna go to that. So if
Okay.
it fails, that's where we're going.
And can
Okay.
I just ask something real quick? Were there
course.
any other questions with the handbooks that anybody, like?
Well, I haven't voted on the whole
So
handbook
this is-
yet.
so- okay,
This
so
is
do we
just
just-
this language.
this-
This is the big one that I'm trying to get to,
Got it.
then we'll go to
Okay.
the individual handbook. So sorry, Katrina,
That's it.
yes or no?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No.
Sue?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
I'm a yes. So it passes, 3-2.
And I just want to make clear, I voted no because I wanted a third read.
No, I got you.
So-
It's okay. It's totally, absolutely fine. And I understand that
Yep.
completely. So if you can make those adjustments,
Yep, I'll
send them
send
out.
it, yep.
If there is anything that seems.
Reply just to me.
Yeah,
not
please
hit
do not reply to
all.
everybody, just to Aaron. If there is anybody that feels as though what I just said is not what is in the handbook, we will reconvene. Okay, now, having said that, I'm going to put a motion on the table and then we can discuss whatever we're going to change. And it's going to have to be as amended because of what we just did. Can I get a motion for consideration for second read and approval of the elementary student handbook as amended?
So moved.
Motion
Second.
by Katrina, seconded by Sue. So is there anything else in the elementary student handbook that you wanted to discuss or that anyone had issue with? So hearing none, just want to be
think so.
sure. Okay, so hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstained? So it's 4-1, Natalie. So can I get a motion for consideration for second read and approval of the amended PCMS student handbook?
So moved.
Motion by Katrina,
Second.
seconded by Sue. Are there any discussions on the PCMS handbook? outside of what we just amended? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstain? It's 4-1, Natalie. And can I get a motion for consideration for a second read and approval of the amended PHS student handbook?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Sue, seconded by David. Are there any concerns outside of what we just talked about?
I just want to make sure the page numbers.
Yes, it'll
Yeah.
all be the right page numbers when
Thank
it
you.
goes on the
It's
website.
actually fair.
Page 19.
One
What
big
page?
page.
It's very long.
So we'll make sure the page numbers are there, TJ.
No, I was just making a terrible joke.
No, it's
What
okay.
page again? Page
Just-
19?
19.
It's 19Q, actually, is where that is. It was actually funny.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstained? It's 4-1, Natalie. So we saw the future meeting dates and topics. If you want to add anything to that list, please either let myself or the superintendent know. So we do have an executive session tonight. So can I get a motion to enter executive session pursuant to Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss a legal matter as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the legal position of the school committee as declared by the chair?
So moved.
Second.
So motion by Allison, seconded by David, by roll call vote. Katrina?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. It's unanimous. We are in executive session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.